Hi everyone and welcome to Monthly Reads. In this series I review the books that I've been reading over the past month. Now in August I went away, so I didn't actually do as much reading as I wanted to. So once I finished the second Wheel of Time book I sort of had a little bit of a break. And then I finally got onto reading a book which has been recommended to me a lot over the years. And this book is The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. Now I know a lot of you probably heard of this book. It is very famous in the fantasy community and is sort of a very well-renowned book. Going into this book I knew base information about it, but not a lot about things like the plot or the characters. Just that it was a fantasy series that had a very well thought out magic system and a very well built world. So that's always a good thing with a fantasy novel. You want a nicely fleshed out world with a magic system. Now this is quite a complex magic system that it has to teach you a lot about. So they call it allomancy, and it's where the characters use metal to be able to gain special powers that allow them to do different things. Now some of the characters can only use one type of metal and have one power, but there are a few of the characters that have the ability to use any of the metals they want. The plot itself revolves around a segregated system where the poor are slaves and they have no control over their lives and are murdered and killed if they don't work hard enough. And it's a very dark world, this is, and it's controlled by this person called the Lord Ruler, who is seen as a god, and the fact that he's lived for 1,000 years just sort of proves even more that he is this godlike being to everybody else. And this group of thieves, they want to change things. They start working with the rebellion and they have this whole plot, and it's actually a really well thought out plot. And they bring this young girl into it after her group sort of ends up causing a little bit of a problem, and she joins them and she has to pretend that she's like this noble lady and she goes to parties and everything. Whereas then you have Kelsier, who is the sort of main leader of this thieving crew that's sort of joined with the rebellion, and he's very confident in who he is. You know, he's able to use all of the metals and has these powers, and he's quite a legend amongst like the poor, who are known as the Scar, and then they sort of like idolize him. And this just builds throughout the book, how he just he builds up his legend and he keeps making it bigger and bigger and bigger. And as their sort of plot for the rebellion sort of doesn't kind of go to plan, like Vin starts to see, she's the girl that joins them and pretends to be a noble lady, she sort of starts to see how the nobles aren't quite that different from the Scar, because they'd always been taught that they were completely different. And she sort of latches on to this young nobleman who's quite influential and powerful, but he has all these interesting ideas about how things aren't the way they really should be, and he's questioning the rule. And this really helps sort of like later on in the book when the rebellion starts to kick off. So their initial plan for the rebellion really doesn't go the way they want it to go. It all ends up getting messed up. But the underlying plan that Kelsier had that he didn't really tell anybody about, that one sort of does carry on as it's supposed to. And it's all these little hidden secrets and lies and things like that. But everybody's all doing it because they're trying to help other people. They're doing it for their good. Because like Vin has this idea that nobody helps anybody, nobody cares about anybody else. And her time throughout the book she starts to learn how people do care, and this leads to a really big nice twist at the end where she learns something about people that she thought never cared about her, and it really changes her perspective on life and gives her that big massive shock. Now the book comes to a nice conclusion, and if I wasn't going to read the other books I probably could leave it there. I did feel it was quite good, but there were lots of unanswered questions, like what is this well of ascension that they keep talking about, the deepness that the Lord Ruler supposedly got rid of and all that. So that was really fascinating to sort of want to know more about that, because you really only scratch the surface of a lot of these things in this book. It's mostly about the rebellion and people starting to question. It's not really getting the answers that you want. Now, in terms of the pacing of the book, I felt it was really quick paced, which is nice. It's what you expect for a sort of more modern fantasy book. You know, the story is constantly carrying on. Each of the characters drives it, so it mostly focuses on Vin and Kelsier, but every now and again we do get a little bit of another character. And at the beginning of each chapter, I thought this was really nice, is you get a little bit of a paragraph that is from this book that was supposedly written by the Lord Ruler. And as it goes on, you sort of learn more and more about that. And so it's kind of interesting to see his character development, and then also to sort of understand what he became at the end. But we still don't fully understand that, which is why I'm intrigued to read the rest of the books. So yeah, pacing was really good, having this jump between two characters, always being in the action, never really being dull. And the story takes place over quite a short period of time, like the rebellion takes place over about a year. And so the bits where they're just doing the mundane rebellion stuff, it kind of jumps. So the book is split into parts, it's 5 parts. So each of those parts, sometimes it does a little time jump of like 2 months have passed, 3 months have passed. So we're not sort of like sitting there constantly getting like, and then they did this, and then they did that, and it's not really interesting at all. It's always when a twist happens. So like you'll get a bit where Vin's like, oh, I'm going to another ball, like all the countless balls I've been to, and then suddenly bam, that something happens after that ball that sort of drives the plot on and changes it. And I thought that was really nice and kept the pace going really fast. In terms of the writing style, it's very much what you would expect for this era of fantasy. You know, it's very modern in its writing. It goes into a lot of detail about the characters' feelings and everything, so we really get a good idea about what they're thinking and feeling at each moment. Even though they're still sort of like hiding things from us, we do get a good sense of the characters being built and developed. And it's quite nice, like, as you're getting these characters developed, the world is developing itself as well. In terms of the magic system, although it's quite complicated, it is actually explained in a really straightforward way. So although you don't fully grasp it to begin with, the more Vin learns about it, as she's only just starting to learn how to use her power, the more we learn about it. And I think that's quite nice how that's added into the plot. So we don't feel like we're being spoon-fed. This is how the magic powers work. It's like, oh, Vin has to learn how the powers work, so it gives us an excuse to learn how they work as well. If I was rating this book compared to other fantasy books, I'd say, although it is very well renowned and it is very popular, I wouldn't say this is my favourite fantasy book, and I wouldn't say it's the best one I've ever read. It's a very good example of the type of fantasy book it is, and I think it's very accessible to other people who might not be interested in reading fantasy, because of the way it was paced and the way it sort of didn't expect you to know things before going into it. So it's definitely an accessible fantasy book, and I would recommend it to anybody that was reading fantasy. But there were a few things in it that I did feel that were predictable, and once you've read a lot of fantasy, like, you know what's going to happen next, and that did sort of take a little bit of the enjoyment out of it. I think what's nice about this book as well is the fact that you had very varied characters. So somebody quite young could read it and enjoy the younger characters in it, whereas somebody who is older can also read it and enjoy the older characters. Normally in a lot of fantasy books you get either a lot of really young characters and then you get the really old characters that help them, but I felt like there was a wide variety of different aged characters, and it was nice to have Vin as the really young female character who was sort of in her late teens, to then have Kelsier who was the older character, and you never really get a definite age for him, but he's definitely over 30, so you know that's quite helpful for an older audience to get into it, having these two main characters with such differing ages. So in conclusion, overall I thought this was a really good book, and I would definitely recommend it to anybody who likes fantasy, or even to people that are trying to get into fantasy. It really does deserve the recognition that it has, and I will definitely be going on to read the 2 sequels that come after it, because I am curious to know what happens next. You know, it does sort of leave you with that little bit of mystery that you want to know. But at the end of the day, I felt that the story concluded nice and satisfactory, so I don't feel a desperate need like I have to read them right away. But knowing me, I probably will. So thank you for watching, and let me know what you thought about this book and what you thought about Brandon Sanderson's other books, because I've been given lots of Brandon Sanderson recommendations, and obviously, as you know, I'm reading the Wheel of Time books, so eventually I'll be getting onto the ones that he part wrote. So yeah, please like and subscribe, and I shall see you in the next video. Bye!